They called him crazy, but after digging 472 holes, Harold Mitchell knew every inch of that dry land, like he knew the lines of his own hands. For 3 years, ever since receiving the first eviction notice, he had dug tirelessly under the scorching sun of the Texas plains, ignoring the laughter and comments from neighbors passing by the dirt road. It was in the first week of March that it all began. Harold was sitting on the porch of his simple home when the mail carrier delivered an official letter bearing the letterhead of the law firm Thompson & Associates. His trembling hands opened the envelope and found words that changed his life forever. Eviction for an unpaid debt left by his late father, George Mitchell. "Dad never told me about any debt," Harold murmured to himself, rereading the letter for the 5th time. The debt was for a loan taken out 20 years ago for property improvements, with accumulated interest that now totaled an impossible sum for a retiree surviving on less than 2 minimum wages per month. The deadline to settle the debt was 6 months. Otherwise, the family would lose the land that had belonged to the Mitchells for 4 generations. Harold walked through the 12-hectare property, trying to understand how he had gotten into that situation. His father had always been an honest and hard-working man who raised 7 children on that land, planting corn, beans, and cassava. He never spoke about loans or debts. On the contrary, he always said the land was the family's most precious asset and should never be sold. "There's something wrong with this whole story," Harold told his daughter Dorothy when she arrived from her home in the city to visit him the following Sunday. Dorothy was a teacher at the municipal school in Amarillo and came every weekend to help her father with household chores and the small crop that still held on. She took the letter from her father's hands and read it carefully, her expression growing increasingly worried. "Dad, are you sure Grandpa never mentioned this debt? Honey, your grandfather died in my arms in this yard. If he had any pending issues, he would have told me. He wasn't the kind of man to leave problems for his children," replied Harold, taking off his faded cap and running his hand through his graying hair. Dorothy looked at the surrounding landscape. The region was going through one of the worst droughts in recent years. The reservoir located 2 kilometers from the property was completely dry, and most of the neighbors had sold their land to an agribusiness company that had set up in the region over the last 5 years. "What if we talked to this law firm? Maybe there's some mistake in the documents," suggested Dorothy. "I already tried. They said all the documents are in order and that a complete search of your grandfather's assets was done when he passed away. According to them, I inherited not only the land but also the debts." Harold got up from the rocking chair where he was sitting and walked to the small fence separating his property from the road. On the other side of the road, he could see the extensive eucalyptus plantation of Northern Agriculture LLC, the company that had bought practically all the land in the region in recent years. "You know what bothers me the most, honey?" said Harold, pointing to the eucalyptus plantation. "Those eucalyptus trees are green and beautiful, even with all this drought. How can a tree like that grow so well in land that has no water?" Dorothy moved closer to her father and looked in the same direction. It was true the trees were in excellent condition, contrasting with the dried-up native vegetation around them. "It must be because they have an irrigation system, Dad. Big companies always have resources for those things." "Irrigation? With what water, girl? The reservoir dried up, the region's wells dried up. Where does the water come from to keep this whole plantation so green?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. It was a question Harold couldn't get out of his head. That night, after Dorothy returned to the city, he sat on the porch watching the stars and remembering the stories his father used to tell. George Mitchell always said those lands held secrets that would one day be discovered. "Harold, this land is special. Your great-grandfather chose this place for a reason," old George used to say. "Why special, Dad?" young Harold would ask. "You'll find out when your time comes, my son. The land always gives signs to those who know how to look." Harold never fully understood what his father meant by those words, but now, facing the possibility of losing everything, he began to wonder if there wasn't some truth behind the old man's stories. The following Monday, Harold decided to go to the city's records office to try and find more information about his father's alleged debt. The records office operated in an old house in downtown Amarillo with piles of dusty documents and clerks who seemed to have been born inside. "I want to see all documents related to the Mitchell family property in the St. Joseph's Farm area," Harold told the clerk who assisted him. The woman, a lady of about 50 with thick glasses, checked the computer and then went to a physical file at the back of the room. "Mr. Harold, here are the property records. I'll also get the documents from the period when your father was the title holder." While waiting, Harold observed the walls of the records office, covered with old maps of the region and historical photographs of the city. One photo in particular caught his attention. It showed a group of men next to drilling rigs, with the date 1987 written in the corner. "Those machines in the photo, what were they doing in the region?" Harold asked when the clerk returned. "Oh, that was an artesian well drilling project. The federal government did a survey of the region's water table, but the project was cancelled before it was finished. We never knew exactly why." The clerk handed Harold a folder with the property documents. He began to leaf through the papers, looking for any reference to the loan mentioned in the law firm's letter. To his surprise, he found nothing. "There's nothing here about a loan or financing," said Harold. "Strange. If your father had taken out a loan using the property as collateral, it should be recorded here. Let me check if there isn't a document in another file." The clerk left again and took almost an hour to return. When she came back, she wore a worried expression. "Mr. Harold, I found something that might interest you. Here is a copy of a technical report from 1998, done by a geologist at your father's request." Harold took the document with trembling hands. The report was signed by Dr. Richard Anderson Clark, geologist, and contained technical information about the soil composition of the property. The conclusion was surprising. The terrain presents characteristics favorable to the existence of an abundant water table at approximately 15 meters depth. "My father commissioned this report?" asked Harold, incredulous. "According to the records, yes. And look here, there's a handwritten note from the geologist himself. Owner requested absolute confidentiality regarding the results. Water of excellent quality, estimated volume of 50,000 liters per hour." Harold felt his heart race. His father knew there was water on the property. A lot of water. Why had he never told him? And why had he requested secrecy about the discovery? "Can I get a copy of this report?" asked Harold. "Of course, but can I give you some advice? Be discreet with this information. Water is a very valuable resource around here, especially now with this drought. There are a lot of people interested in land with water potential." Harold returned home with his mind racing. Now he understood why Northern Agriculture LLC was so interested in buying the properties in the region. It wasn't to plant eucalyptus, it was for the water. That night he called Dorothy and told her about the discovery at the records office. "Dad, this changes everything. If there really is water on our land, it's worth a lot more than this debt that came out of nowhere." "But how do we prove the water is there, honey? The report was done over 20 years ago. And even if there is still water, how are we going to drill a well? We don't have the money to hire a drilling company." Dorothy was silent for a few seconds before answering. "Dad, what if we started by digging manually, just to see if we find signs of moisture in the soil? Dig a 50-foot hole by hand? Honey, I'm 65 years old. It doesn't have to be all at once, Dad. We can dig a little each day, and if we find signs of water, then we hire someone to do the professional drilling." The idea seemed crazy, but Harold didn't have many options. The next day, he went into town to buy a new shovel and began his first excavation at the location indicated on the map that came with the geologist's report. The first hole was dug in the backyard near the house. Harold worked from 6 in the morning until 10, when the sun got too strong. He rested in the shade of the pecan tree until 4 in the afternoon and went back to digging until nightfall. He managed a depth of about 6 feet on the first day. "Mrs. Evelyn, what is Mr. Harold doing in that backyard?" asked Mildred, a neighbor who lived across the road to Evelyn, the wife of Walter, the closest neighbor. "Evelyn said he's digging a hole. Old man's business. He must be losing his mind with all this debt pressure," replied Mildred, shaking her head. "Poor man. Age comes for us all." The neighbor's comments soon reached Harold's ears, but he kept digging. On the third day, he reached about 10 feet deep and began to find a layer of damper clay. His heart filled with hope. On the 5th day, Dorothy arrived for the weekend and found her father covered in dirt, with blisters on his hands, but with a smile on his face that she hadn't seen in months. "Honey, come see here," said Harold, showing the hole. "Look at the color of this soil down here. It's darker, damper." Dorothy looked into the hole and indeed saw that the soil was different. There was a change in the color and texture of the earth. "Dad, that could really be a sign. Let's keep going." That weekend, father and daughter worked together on the excavation. Dorothy brought gardening gloves and a second, smaller shovel. They worked in shifts, one resting while the other dug. On the 7th day of digging, with the hole already reaching about 13 feet deep, they found something unexpected: pieces of rusted metal buried in the earth. "What is this, Dad?" asked Dorothy, examining the metal fragments. "I don't know, honey. Looks like old piping, but I can't tell from what time." Harold cleaned one of the pieces of metal and saw there were numbers engraved: 1987, the same date as the photo he'd seen at the records office with the drilling rigs. "Dorothy, I think we found traces of that project that was cancelled. This metal must be remains of the equipment they used here. Does that mean they really drilled wells in the area?" "It seems so. And if they cancelled the project, they might have left the wells capped or abandoned." The discovery of the rusted metals gave Harold new motivation to keep digging. If there were traces of old drilling at the site, it meant someone had already identified that spot as promising for finding water. During the week, while digging alone, Harold began to notice other strange details on the property. There were small elevations in the ground that formed an almost circular pattern, as if something had been buried there a long time ago. He also noticed that the native vegetation in some specific areas was greener and more resilient, even with the drought. On the 10th day of excavation, something happened that completely changed the neighbors' perception of what Harold was doing. He was digging when he heard a strange noise coming from the bottom of the hole. It was as if the shovel had hit something hollow. "Must be a rock," thought Harold. But when he cleared the dirt around it, he discovered he had hit a concrete structure. Working more carefully, he managed to expose part of what looked like a circular concrete lid, about 1 meter in diameter. There were inscriptions on the lid, but they were covered by decades of dirt and corrosion. Harold ran home to get a brush and a bucket of water to clean the lid. When he managed to read the inscriptions, his heart almost stopped. "Artesian Well Number 3, Northern Waters Project, 1987. "My God," murmured Harold. "They really drilled here." That afternoon he tried to open the lid, but it was completely sealed. He would need special tools and help to remove it. He decided to wait until the weekend to tell Dorothy about the discovery. Meanwhile, across the road, Walter Harrison watched Harold's activities with growing interest. Walter was the owner of the second largest property in the region, after Northern Agriculture LLC, and had always been envious of the Mitchell's land, which was in a strategic position between his property and the main highway. "Evelyn, that old man is hiding something," Walter said to his wife during dinner. "Nobody digs a 4-meter hole in their backyard without a very strong reason." "Leave the man alone, Walter. He's already going through difficulties with all that debt," replied Evelyn. Debt that appeared out of nowhere conveniently when Northern Agriculture LLC started buying up all the land in the region. There's something fishy about this whole story. Walter wasn't wrong in his suspicions. He himself had received an offer from Northern Agriculture LLC to sell his property, but for a price well above market value. The offer was made by the company's own director, Dr. Richard Patterson, who had said the region had strategic potential for the company's business. On Friday of the second week, Dr. Richard Patterson appeared at Harold's property, driving an imported car and wearing a suit that contrasted completely with the rural setting. "Mr. Harold, I'm Richard Patterson, Director of Northern Agriculture LLC. I'd like to talk to you about your property." Harold was working in the backyard, organizing the tools he used for the excavation. He had covered the hole with a tarp to protect it from the rain that threatened to fall. "What do you want with me?" asked Harold, not letting go of the shovel in his hands. "I heard you're facing some financial difficulties. Our company would like to make a proposal to help you." Richard Patterson looked discreetly around the backyard, trying to understand what Harold was doing there. "What kind of proposal?" asked Harold suspiciously. "We can pay off your debt and even pay an additional amount for the property. It's a very advantageous offer, considering the current state of the region. I'm not interested in selling. This land has belonged to my family for 4 generations." Richard Patterson smiled, but Harold noticed it wasn't a sincere smile. "Mr. Harold, be reasonable. With this drought, agriculture in the region is unviable. What do you intend to do with this dry land?" "That's my problem," replied Harold firmly. "May I know what you're doing in that hole?" asked Richard, pointing to the area covered with the tarp. "That's also my problem." Richard Patterson realized he wouldn't get more information at that moment, but his visit wasn't in vain. He had noticed piles of fresh dirt, excavation tools, and most importantly a determination in the old man's gaze that suggested Harold knew something important about that land. "Well, Mr. Harold, I'll leave my card. If you change your mind, you can call me any time." "The offer is for a limited time," said Richard before leaving. After the director of Northern Agriculture LLC left, Harold became even more convinced he was on the right path. The pressure for him to sell the land only confirmed there was something valuable there. When Dorothy arrived on Saturday, Harold told her about Richard Patterson's visit and showed her the discovery of the artesian well cap. "Dad, this is incredible. You mean there's really a drilled well here?" "It seems so, daughter, but it's been sealed for over 30 years. I don't know if it still has water or if it was abandoned because it dried up. There's only one way to find out. Let's try to open this cap." Father and daughter spent the rest of Saturday trying different methods to remove the concrete cap. They used improvised levers, tried to break the edges with a hammer, but the cap was extremely well sealed. That's when Dorothy had an idea. "Dad, what if we dug next to the cap? If it really is a well, there must be a vertical structure going down below." The idea made sense. They started digging next to the cap, following the well's circular structure. It was harder work as they encountered a wall of concrete pipes that formed the well casing. On Sunday, after 2 days of intense work, they managed to dig enough to see inside the well through a small opening in the side. Harold grabbed a flashlight and shone it inside. "Dorothy, come see this," said Harold, his voice choked with emotion. Dorothy approached and looked through the opening. At the bottom of the well, about 12 meters deep, there was water. Clean, abundant water that reflected the flashlight's beam like a mirror. "Dad, there's water. There's a lot of water down there. And by the color and clarity, it seems to be good quality water," added Harold. They had found an active artesian well, preserved for over 3 decades. The discovery completely changed the Mitchell family's situation. Now they had their own water source in a region suffering from one of the worst droughts in history. But the joy was short-lived. On Monday, when Harold returned to the backyard to continue working on opening the well, he found the site vandalized. Someone had thrown dirt and rocks into the hole that gave access to the well, and his tools had been damaged. "Who did this?" thought Harold, looking at the damage. There were no clear footprints on the ground, but it was obvious someone had sabotaged his work during the night. Harold looked around and realized he could be observed from the road and the neighboring properties. Anyone passing by could have seen what he was doing. He decided to redo the work, but now taking extra care to protect his discovery. During the day he worked normally, but at night he covered everything with a tarp and placed some old tools around to discourage further acts of vandalism. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. It was during that week that Harold met Mrs. Grace, a 72-year-old woman who lived in a small house in town, but had grown up in the rural area before the highway was built. She appeared one Wednesday afternoon, walking along the road, and stopped to talk. "Mr. Harold, can I ask you a question?" said Mrs. Grace, leaning on the fence. "Of course, Mrs. Grace. What would you like to know?" "You're digging those holes because of the story about the artesian wells, aren't you?" Harold stopped working and approached the fence. How did this woman know about the wells? "What story is that, Mrs. Grace?" "My husband worked on that government project back in 1987. He was a drilling rig operator. He said they drilled several wells in the area, all with abundant, excellent quality water." And why was the project cancelled? Oh, that's a long and complicated story. It involved a lot of important people, politicians, business owners. My husband always said it was political pressure to favor some of the big landowners in the area. Harold felt he was starting to understand the puzzle. Mrs. Grace, do you know how many wells were drilled in the area? According to my husband, there were 17 wells, all sealed up when the project was cancelled. The machines were gone from one week to the next, and the workers were forbidden to talk about what they found. And do you know where these wells are? Mrs. Grace looked around to make sure no one was listening and moved closer to the fence. My husband made a map before he died. He said that one day someone would need this information. If you'd like to see it, I can bring it next week. Harold could barely sleep that night. Mrs. Grace's revelation opened up possibilities he hadn't even imagined. If there really were 17 sealed artesian wells in the area, that explained why Northern Agriculture LLC was so interested in buying all the properties. On Thursday, he decided to do something he hadn't done in years. He visited Walter Harrison, his neighbor, to try to better understand what was happening in the area. "Walter, can I talk to you about this land business?" asked Harold, finding his neighbor fixing a fence. "Of course, Harold, I'm also worried about all these changes around here. Did you get an offer from Northern Agriculture LLC? Walter stopped working and looked around before answering. "Yes, I did. A very strange offer, actually. They offered 3 times more than what the land is worth, according to the county." "3 times more?" asked Harold, surprised. "Yeah, and the strangest part is they said it wasn't for farming. They mentioned something about strategic resources and long-term regional development. Walter, have you noticed that their eucalyptus trees are always green, even with this drought?" "Yes, I have. And I've also noticed they have water trucks coming from the capital twice a week. Must cost a fortune in water." Harold realized Walter didn't know about the artesian wells, but his observations confirmed that Northern Agriculture LLC had access to information about the region's water resources. "Walter, if I told you there might be water hidden in all this land, would you believe me? Water, with this drought. Harold, are you okay? I'm serious, and if I prove there's water, would you help me stop this company from taking over the whole area?" Walter looked at Harold with an expression that mixed concern and curiosity. "Harold, if you really know something about water around here, that could be dangerous. This company has a lot of power, a lot of money. That's exactly why I need allies. I can't face this alone. What do you want me to do? For now, just keep your eyes open. If you see any strange activity on my property, people who shouldn't be there, let me know." Walter agreed, and Harold returned home feeling he had taken the first step to form a support network in the region. On Friday, Mrs. Grace appeared as promised, carrying an old leather briefcase with documents yellowed by time. "Mr. Harold, I brought the papers I promised, but I want you to understand one thing. This information could be very valuable but also very dangerous." "How so? Dangerous?" "My husband died 3 years after the project was cancelled. A work accident on a construction site in Houston. But before he died, he told me he had received threats for knowing too much about the wells." Mrs. Grace opened the briefcase and showed a hand-drawn map with the detailed location of the 17 artesian wells drilled in the region. 3 of them were on Harold's property, 5 on Walter's property, 4 on lands that now belong to Northern Agriculture LLC, and the other 5 on small properties that had also recently been sold to the same company. "Mrs. Grace, this is worth a fortune," said Harold, studying the map. "That's why they killed my husband, Mr. Harold. He knew that some politicians and businessmen of the time made a deal to cancel the project and keep the wells hidden until the right moment to exploit the water." "What kind of deal?" "The plan was to wait for the region to become more developed with better infrastructure, and then discover the wells, as if it were a new survey. That way, whoever controlled the land with water would have a lot of political and economic power." Harold felt a chill in his stomach. If Mrs. Grace's story was true, he was messing with very powerful interests. "What do you think I should do?" "First, prove the water is there. Second, document everything very well. Third, be careful who you tell this information." Mrs. Grace left a copy of the map with Harold and left, not without warning him once more about the dangers involved. Over the weekend, Harold and Dorothy used the map to locate the other 2 wells that should exist on the property. The first was located near the dry pond, in an area that had always been greener than the rest of the property. "Dad, here's that circular rise you had noticed," said Dorothy, pointing to the spot indicated on the map. They started digging on Saturday morning, and within a few hours found another concrete lid identical to the first. This well was also sealed, but the structure was better preserved. "2 wells confirmed," said Harold. "If the map is correct, there's still a 3rd one on the border with Walter's property." On Sunday, they located the 3rd well, which was in an area of native brush near the property line. This one was more hidden by vegetation, which explained why it had never been noticed before. "Dad, now that we know where the 3 wells are, what are we going to do?" asked Dorothy. "First, we'll document everything, take photos, measure distances, note all the information. Then we'll look for a geologist to do an updated technical report." "What about the other wells? The ones on Mr. Walter's property and on the Northern Agriculture LLC lands?" "That's more complicated. I can't go onto their property to check, but I can talk to Walter about the wells on his land." On Monday, Harold went back to town to hire a geologist. He looked up several environmental and geological consulting firms, but they all asked for very high prices to do a complete study of the property. That's when he met Professor Charles Edwards, a retired geologist from the University of West Texas who did private consulting for more affordable rates. "Professor, I need an expert report on water resources on my property. I have reason to believe there is a significant aquifer in the area. Mr. Harold, this type of study can be quite complex. I need to perform soil analysis drillings, permeability tests, and analyze water quality if we find any. Professor, I've already found water. I need someone to scientifically confirm what I've discovered." Charles Edwards was intrigued and agreed to visit the property the following Wednesday. When the geologist arrived and saw the 3 artesian wells that Harold had located, his expression changed completely. "Mr. Harold, this is very important. These wells appear to have been drilled by professional equipment decades ago, but were never developed. Is it possible to estimate the water capacity of these wells?" "I can perform basic tests, yes, but I can already say that, based on the structure I'm seeing and the water quality I've managed to observe, we're talking about a significant water source." Professor Charles Edwards spent 3 days on the property conducting analyses and collecting samples. His tests confirmed that the 3 wells had abundant, excellent quality water, with an estimated production capacity exceeding 5,000 gallons per hour each. "Mr. Harold, with this production capacity, you could supply the entire region for decades. This water is worth far more than your entire property," said the professor, handing over the technical report. "Professor, what do you know about the government's artesian well drilling project in 1987? That project was very controversial at the time. They found abundant water throughout the region, but the project was cancelled due to budgetary issues. Many of my colleagues suspected there were political interests behind the cancellation. And is it possible there are other sealed wells in the area? It's very likely. Projects like that typically drilled several wells in the same area to completely map the aquifer." With the technical report in hand, Harold now had scientific proof that his property held valuable water resources, but he also knew this discovery could bring serious problems. On Thursday, Richard Patterson appeared at the property again, this time accompanied by a man who introduced himself as the company's lawyer. "Mr. Harold, I understand you've been doing some digging on the property. I must warn you that any alteration of the land without an environmental permit can be considered a crime against the environment," said the lawyer. "I'm digging on my own land," replied Harold. "Yes, but if this digging affects the regional aquifer, there could be legal implications. We've come to offer our help to regularize the situation," said Richard Patterson. "What kind of help?" "We can guide you on the necessary permits and even finance the regularization costs, in exchange for a small agreement concerning the use of any water resources that are eventually found." Harold realized they knew exactly what he had discovered. Someone was informing the company about his activities. "I don't need your help, thank you for the visit," said Harold, ending the conversation. After the company representatives left, Harold called Dorothy and told her about the new pressure he was facing. Dad, they're trying to intimidate you. That only proves our discovery is important. Honey, I'm starting to worry. These people have a lot of power and could create legal problems for us. Dad, you have the professor's report confirming the water is there, and you have Mrs. Grace's map proving the wells were drilled by the government. We haven't done anything wrong. Dorothy was right, but Harold knew that being right doesn't always mean being protected. He decided to seek legal help to better understand his rights as a rural landowner with water resources. Dr. William Turner was a lawyer specializing in environmental and agricultural law who had an office in Houston but served clients from all over rural Texas. Harold made an appointment and brought all the documents related to his discovery. Mr. Harold, your situation is very interesting from a legal standpoint. You have owned the land for decades. The water resources were discovered on your property through a government project. And now you have a technical report proving the existence and quality of the water, analyzed Dr. William. And what about the threat of an environmental crime? It doesn't apply. You have the right to do excavations on your property for subsistence and domestic use. If it were for large-scale commercial exploitation, then you would indeed need specific permits. And can the company force some kind of partnership regarding the water? No, unless there is some specific clause in the property deed or some regional agreement about water resources. But from the documents you brought, I don't see anything in that regard. Dr. William advised Harold to formalize the discovery with the competent authorities and suggested that he seek support from the municipal government to develop a community water supply project. Dr. William, do you think I should make this discovery public? It depends on your goals. If you want to keep the property and use the water sustainably, it might be interesting to have community support. If you just want legal protection, you can maintain discretion and formalize it only with the official agencies. Harold returned home with more clarity about his rights, but still worried about the pressures he might face. During the trip back, he stopped at Walter's house to talk about the wells that should exist on his neighbor's property. "Walter, I need to tell you something important about our lands," said Harold. He told him about the artesian wells, showed him Mrs. Grace's map, and explained about the 1987 government project. "Harold, are you telling me there might be water wells on my property too?" "According to this map, there are 5 wells on your land, all sealed for over 30 years. Walter studied the map carefully and identified the indicated locations. "Now I understand why Northern Agriculture LLC is offering so much money for the land. They know about the wells." "Exactly. And if we do nothing, they'll buy all the properties in the region and control all the water. What do you propose?" "That we work together to find and open these wells. With our own water, our properties will be worth much more, and we can help the whole community during this drought." Walter agreed with the proposal, and the two neighbors decided to form a partnership to explore the water resources on their properties. The following Saturday, Harold, Dorothy, and Walter began locating the wells on the Harrison property. The first was found easily in an area that had always been greener than the rest of the property. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Walter, look at this," said Harold, showing the concrete lid they had just discovered. "It's identical to the ones you found on your property," observed Walter. "And look here," said Dorothy, cleaning a metal plaque fixed beside the lid. "Artesian well no. 7. Northern Waters Project, 1987. They spent the rest of the weekend locating the other 4 wells on Walter's property. All were sealed but in good condition. 8 wells confirmed between the 2 properties, said Harold. If everyone has the same capacity as mine, we could produce over 160,000 litres of water per hour. That's a fortune in times of drought, added Walter. On Monday, they decided to start opening one of the wells on Walter's property to confirm if the water was still there. They chose the one farthest from the road to avoid curious onlookers. The work of opening it was easier than expected. The concrete cover had been designed to be removed when needed, and after a few hours of effort, they managed to lift it completely. The well revealed an impressive structure, excellent quality concrete pipes descending to a depth of about 15 meters, with crystal clear water occupying the last 8 meters. "Walter, this water is clean as crystal," said Harold, shining a powerful flashlight into the well. "And it seems there's plenty. The level is quite high," observed Walter. They improvised a bucket with a rope to test the water quality. When they tasted it, they confirmed it was excellent quality fresh water with no strange taste or odor. "Now we need a pump to test the production capacity," said Harold. "And we also need to think about how to protect these wells. If Northern Agriculture LLC discovers we've found water, they'll intensify the pressure to buy our land," warned Walter. It was then that they decided to look for other landowners in the area who might have wells on their properties. According to Mrs. Grace's map, there were at least 3 small farms that should also have artesian wells. Harold knew Joseph Parker well, who had a 5-hectare farm where he raised goats and planted forage cactus. Joseph was a 60-year-old man, highly respected in the community for his honesty and hard work. "Joseph, I need to talk to you about an important discovery," said Harold, visiting his neighbor on a Wednesday afternoon. Joseph listened carefully to the story of the artesian wells and studied the map Harold brought. "Harold, I always thought it was strange to have an area on my property where the vegetation is different, greener, and more resilient. According to this map, that's exactly where there should be a well. Want to try to locate it? Of course. If there really is water there, it could solve many of the region's problems." On Saturday, Harold, Walter, and Joseph worked together to locate the well on the Parker property. They found the sealed cover exactly at the location indicated by the map. Artesian Well Number 12, Northern Waters Project, 1987, read Joseph on the identification plate. "Now we are 3 families with water wells," said Walter. "And if we can find the other landowners who should have wells on their land, we can form a group to protect ourselves from Northern Agriculture LLC, suggested Harold. The idea of forming a group of landowners with water resources evolved over the following weeks. They managed to locate and speak with 2 more small landowners who had wells on their land. Mrs. Ruth, a 70-year-old widow who raised chickens, and Sebastian, a 35-year-old man who had inherited 2 plots of land from his grandfather. "Folks, if we organize ourselves properly, we can turn this region into one of the most prosperous in Texas," said Sebastian during a meeting at Harold's house. "How so?" asked Mrs. Ruth. "With all this water, we can develop irrigated agriculture, raise fish, even set up a small agribusiness. The region can become green and productive again," explained Sebastian, who had technical training in agriculture. "But first we need to protect ourselves from the pressure from that company," warned Joseph. "And we also need to regularize the use of these wells with the competent authorities," added Walter. Harold proposed that they seek technical and legal advice to form an association of small rural farmers focused on the sustainable use of water resources. "If we form an association, we'll have more political strength to negotiate with the city and the state government," said Harold. The proposal was accepted by everyone, and they decided to seek guidance from the Texas Agricultural Extension Service, USDA Extension Service, and the Farm Workers Union. It was during this organizational phase that something happened that none of them expected. Richard Patterson from Northern Agriculture LLC showed up at Joseph's property with a different proposal than the previous ones. "Mr. Joseph, our company would like to form a partnership to develop an irrigation project in the region. We could invest in infrastructure and technology in exchange for a share of the production," said Richard. "What kind of infrastructure?" asked Joseph, suspicious. "Modern irrigation systems, artesian well drilling, water distribution systems, specialized technical assistance." Joseph realized the company was changing its strategy. Instead of trying to buy the land, it was now offering a partnership to exploit the water resources. "I'll think about your proposal and give you an answer next week," said Joseph. After Richard Patterson left, Joseph rushed to tell the others about the company's new approach. "They know we discovered the wells," said Walter. "That's why they changed their strategy." "And the proposal doesn't seem bad at first glance," observed Sebastian. "Investment in infrastructure at no cost to us." "But what will be the price of this partnership?" questioned Harold. "Companies like this don't do charity." "We need to study it well before accepting any proposal," said Mrs. Ruth. My husband always said that when an offer seems too good to be true, it's wise to be suspicious. They decided to seek out Dr. William Turner, the lawyer specializing in environmental law, to analyze the terms of the partnership proposal. This type of partnership can be advantageous, but you need to be careful about a few issues, explained Dr. William. First, who will have control over production and marketing? Second, what will be the percentage of participation for each party? Third, how long will the partnership last? And if they want total control over the water, asked Harold, then you could completely lose autonomy over your own resources. It's important to maintain control over the wells and only negotiate the use of the water, not the ownership of the water resources. The lawyer advised the group to demand a detailed contract with all conditions clearly defined and not to accept clauses that transferred control of the wells to the company. During the following week, Harold and his partners intensely discussed the proposal from Northern Agriculture LLC. Sebastian was in favor of the partnership, provided the terms were fair. Joseph and Walter were undecided. Mrs. Ruth was against any deal with the company. "I don't trust these people," said Mrs. Ruth. "If they wanted to help the region, why didn't they do it before the drought?" "But on our own we don't have the resources to develop a large project," argued Sebastian. "With their investment, we can transform the region quickly." It was then that Mrs. Grace brought information that completely changed the group's perspective on the company. "Mr. Harold, I found out something important about this Northern Agriculture LLC," she said one Friday afternoon. "What is it, Mrs. Grace?" "I went to the records office in the capital to research the company. It was founded in 1987, exactly the year the well project was cancelled, and one of the founding partners is related to the politician who was the Secretary of Water Resources at the time." "You mean they knew about the wells from the beginning?" asked Walter. "Not only did they know, but they helped cancel the project so they could buy the land later, when the region was struggling because of the drought," explained Mrs. Grace. "This is very serious," said Harold. "It means they planned all this over 30 years ago?" Mrs. Grace's revelation completely changed the group's attitude toward the partnership proposal. Now they knew they were dealing with a company that had manipulated the region's situation decades ago. "We can't accept a partnership with those who deceived us for so many years," said Joseph. "I agree. Let's stick to our original plan of forming the association and developing our own project," said Walter. "But how will we get the resources to invest in equipment and infrastructure?" asked Sebastian. "There are government programs to support small rural producers and water security projects," said Harold. "We can seek public funding instead of depending on this company." The following Saturday, Joseph gave the official answer to Richard Patterson. The group of landowners had no interest in partnering with Northern Agriculture LLC. Richard was not at all pleased with the answer. "Gentlemen, you are making a mistake. Our company has experience and resources you will never have. Rural development requires heavy investment and specialized technical knowledge," said Richard. "We appreciate the proposal, but we prefer to develop our own project," replied Joseph firmly. "I hope you don't regret this decision," said Richard before leaving, in a tone that sounded more like a threat than advice. After the definitive refusal of the partnership, the pressure on the group increased significantly. Harold began receiving frequent visits from city inspectors, alleging irregularities on his property that had never been mentioned before. "Mr. Harold, we've received a complaint that you are making alterations to the land without an environmental permit," said an inspector on a Tuesday. "What alterations? I'm just digging on my own property." "Excavations that could affect the water table require specific authorization. You'll have to halt work until you regularize the situation." Harold knew that inspection was the result of pressure from Northern Agriculture LLC, but decided not to confront it directly. Instead, he sought out Dr. William to understand how to legally regularize his activities. "Doctor, William, they're trying to stop my work through municipal inspections. That's a common strategy to pressure small landowners. Let's immediately file the permit applications for your activities. Once the processes are underway, they cannot stop your work." The lawyer advised Harold to document all irregularities committed by the inspectors and to prepare a report for the district attorney's office about possible abuse of power. Meanwhile, Walter, Joseph, and the other group members also began facing similar pressures. Inspectors appeared without notice, alleging anonymous complaints and demanding documentation that didn't always exist. "Everyone, they're trying to intimidate us," said Walter during an emergency group meeting. "We need to organize better to resist this pressure." It was then that Sebastian suggested a strategy that changed the course of the situation. "What if we made our discovery public?" he said. "If the whole community knows about the wells, it becomes harder for the company to pressure us." "How so?" asked Mrs. Ruth. "We could organize an event in the town square, invite the local press, show the evidence of the wells, explain about the 1987 project that was cancelled. Transparency could be our best protection." The idea of making the discovery public divided the group. Harold and Walter thought it was risky, as it could attract unwanted attention. Joseph and Mrs. Ruth supported the proposal, believing community support would be important. "Let's vote," suggested Sebastian. "Who is in favor of making the discovery public?" Joseph, Mrs. Ruth, and Sebastian voted in favor. Harold and Walter voted against. The group was tied. "I need more time to think about this," said Harold. "It's a very important decision." During the following week, Harold talked at length with Dorothy about the pros and cons of making the discovery public. "Dad, if we do nothing, this company will manage to pressure us until we give up," said Dorothy. "But if the community knows the truth, they will support us." "Daughter, I'm worried about the consequences. If we draw too much attention, we could attract even bigger problems." "Dad, you've faced so many hardships to get here. You can't give up now when you're so close to proving you were right from the beginning." Dorothy was right. Harold had dug 472 holes in 3 years, faced the disbelief of his neighbors, the pressure from the company, the legal threats, and finally discovered not just water, but an entire network of water resources that could transform the region. On Friday, he called the other members of the group. "Everyone, I've changed my mind. Let's make our discovery public. Sebastian was right. Transparency is our best protection." The event was scheduled for the following Saturday in the central square of Amarillo. Sebastian, who had contacts in the regional press through his work at the Farmers Cooperative, managed to attract journalists from 3 local newspapers and a radio station. Harold prepared a simple but complete presentation about the whole story, from the eviction letter he had received 3 years ago to the discovery of his father's geological report, the location of the artesian wells, the revelation about the cancelled government project in 1987, and the current pressure from Northern Agriculture LLC. "I dug 472 holes in 3 years, Harold told the small crowd gathered in the square. "Everyone called me crazy, but I knew my father wouldn't lie about the family lands." He showed photos of the discovered wells, copies of Mrs. Grace's map, Professor Charles Edwards's report, and documents from the county clerk's office proving the existence of the 1987 project. "This region has enough water to supply the entire population for decades, but this information was hidden over 30 years ago to favor private interests." The community's reaction was very positive. Many residents came forward to see the documents and ask questions. Several people shared stories of family members who had worked on the 1987 project and confirmed that a lot of water had indeed been found in the region. "Mr. Harold, my father was a welder and worked on that project," said a man about 40 years old. "He always said he never saw so much water underground as here in this region." "My mother worked in the kitchen at the technicians' camp," said an elderly lady. She remembers they were very excited about the results, but suddenly everything was cancelled and no one could talk about it anymore. The journalists present were interested in the story and promised to investigate more about the cancelled project and the actions of Northern Agriculture LLC in the region. "Mr. Harold, we're going to do a series of reports on this discovery," said the journalist from the region's main newspaper. "The public has a right to know about these water resources." The following Sunday, the first report about the artesian wells was published under the headline, "Retiree Discovers Network of Artesian Wells Hidden for 30 Years." The impact was much greater than the group had expected. On Monday, the story was republished by newspapers in the capital and gained space on state news websites. Harold's phone wouldn't stop ringing, with calls from journalists, politicians, technicians from public agencies, and the curious. "Mr. Harold, This is the State Water Resources Department. We'd like to schedule a technical visit to verify the situation of these artesian wells, said a government employee. Mr. Harold, I'm from the Texas Environmental Institute. We need to talk about the regularization of the use of these water resources, called another technician. Mr. Harold, this is from the television program Rural Texas. We'd like to do a special report on your discovery, offered a TV producer. The media attention brought support, but also new pressures. Richard Patterson from Northern Agriculture LLC scheduled an urgent meeting with Harold. Mr. Harold, all this exposure could bring serious problems for you. Security issues, trespassing, conflicts with other parties interested in the water resources, warned Richard. What kind of security problems? Asked Harold. Water resources attract all kinds of people. Trespassers, speculators, organized groups. You may no longer have peace on your property. Harold realized this was a veiled threat, but decided not to be intimidated. Dr. Richard, this land has belonged to my family for 4 generations. I'm not leaving here out of fear of anyone. Mr. Harold, our company is still willing to make a favorable agreement. We can guarantee your safety and that of your family plus financial compensation far exceeding the land's value. I'm not interested in selling. What about the water exploitation? We can form a partnership where you retain ownership of the land and we handle the commercial exploitation of the water resources. I'm not interested in that either. Richard Patterson left visibly irritated, and Harold knew the pressure would only increase. During the week, other people from the region sought Harold wanting to know more about the artesian wells. Some were residents genuinely interested in understanding the situation. Others were clearly spies sent to gather information. Mr. Harold, where exactly are these wells located? Asked a man who claimed to be a researcher from a private university. They are located on several properties in the region, Harold replied, without giving specific details. And is it true the production capacity is very high? According to the tests we ran, yes. Would you have the exact coordinates of the wells? It would be important for our academic research. Harold grew suspicious and asked to see identification documents from the supposed researcher. The man made up an excuse and left without showing anything. Dorothy, there are people trying to get information about the exact location of the wells, Harold told his daughter. Dad, you need to be more careful. If someone finds out where all the wells are, they might try to trespass on the properties or even damage the structures. It was then that Harold decided to implement security measures on the group's properties. They organized informal surveillance shifts and installed padlocks on the well caps that had been opened. On Wednesday of that week, something happened that confirmed Harold's suspicions about the sabotage attempts. Walter discovered that someone had tried to force open the cap of one of the wells on his property during the night. Harold, they tried to open the well near the property line with the road, Walter reported. The cap is damaged and has pry marks. Did they manage to open it? No, because we installed that reinforced padlock, but they tried hard. Walter, you need to file a police report. This is trespassing and attempted property damage. Walter went to the local police station and filed the incident report. The sheriff listened to the story carefully and promised to increase patrols in the area. Mr. Walter, I'll instruct my officers to be alert to any unusual activity on the rural properties in the region. If you see anything suspicious, call immediately, said the sheriff. The attempted sabotage served as a warning to the whole group. They realized that the discovery of the wells had attracted the interest of people who would not respect property rights. On Friday, Harold received a visit that completely changed his perspective on the situation. It was Dr. Richard Anderson Clark, the geologist who had prepared the report for his father in 1998. Mr. Harold, I saw the news reports about your discovery and came here to tell a truth I've kept for over 20 years, said Dr. Richard. What truth? Your father wasn't the only one who commissioned studies on the artesian wells. I prepared several confidential reports for different landowners in the region between 1995 and 2000. For whom else did you prepare reports? For politicians, business people, even representatives of agribusiness companies. They all wanted to know about the region's water resources. Dr. Richard opened an old folder and showed copies of more than 15 technical reports he had made in the region over the years. Mr. Harold, This region has been studied by dozens of professionals since the official project was cancelled. Everyone knew there was abundant water here. And why did you never speak about this publicly? Because I received threats. After I prepared the report for your father, I was approached by people who offered me a lot of money not to disclose information about the region's water resources. What kind of people? Politicians, business people, representatives of large companies, all with the same interest, to keep the existence of the wells secret until the right time to exploit them. Dr. Richard handed Harold copies of all the reports he had made in the region. Now that you've made the discovery public, I can finally tell the truth. This region has one of the largest aquifers in southwest Texas. The water production capacity is enough to supply a city of 200,000 inhabitants. Dr. Richard, are you saying they knew about this for over 20 years? Not only did they know, but they planned in detail how to control these resources. The cancellation of the project in 1987 wasn't due to lack of funds. It was to allow time to organize the purchase of the land at low prices. Dr. Richard's revelation confirmed all of Harold's suspicions about the conspiracy involving the region's water resources. Now he had documentary proof that the situation was even more serious than he had imagined. Over the weekend, Harold gathered the entire group of landowners again to share Dr. Richard's information. Everyone, now we understand the real scale of what we're facing, said Harold, showing the reports. It's not just one company trying to buy our land. It's a scheme that has been planned for decades. What does this mean for us? Asked Joseph. It means we have resources worth millions in our hands, but also that we're messing with very powerful interests, replied Walter. So now what do we do? Asked Mrs. Ruth. Now we'll use this evidence to report the entire scheme to the competent authorities. The District Attorney's Office, the Government Accountability Office, the State Water Resources Department, said Sebastian. Dr. William Turner, the group's lawyer, advised on how to formalize the complaints based on Dr. Richard's documents. With this evidence, you have a very strong case. You can prove there was manipulation of public information, irregular cancellation of a government project, and attempted misappropriation of water resources, explained Dr. William. Doctor, William, are we at any legal risk for having discovered and opened the wells? Asked Harold. On the contrary, you performed a public service by uncovering resources that were being hidden from the population. What you did was a legitimate defense of public assets. The following Monday, Dr. William Turner filed formal complaints with the state and federal attorney general's offices based on Dr. Richard's technical documents and the evidence collected by the group over the months. The response was not long in coming. On Wednesday, prosecutors from the Attorney General's office visited the region for a technical inspection of the discovered wells. Mr. Mitchell, these discoveries are of the utmost importance for the entire region. We will open an inquiry to investigate the irregularities in the cancellation of the 1987 project, said prosecutor Dr. Margaret Stevens. And what about the pressure we're facing from Northern Agriculture LLC? We will investigate that as well. If there is any attempt at coercion or illegal intimidation, the company could face criminal charges. The official investigation brought protection for the group, but also new challenges. Now they needed to prove they were capable of using the water resources sustainably and for the benefit of the entire community. Everyone, it's not enough to report the problems. We have to show we know how to care for this water responsibly, said Sebastian. It was then that they decided to develop a pilot project for sustainable family farming using the water from the artesian wells. Sebastian, with his technical training, would be responsible for the agronomic planning. Let's start small, explained Sebastian. Each family will cultivate a 2-hectare area with drip irrigation. We'll plant high-quality crops, vegetables, fruits, medicinal herbs. And will the water from the wells be enough? Asked Mrs. Ruth. According to my calculations, a single well can irrigate more than 50 hectares without compromising the renewal of the water table, replied Sebastian. The pilot project began to be implemented at the start of the next dry season. Each family invested their savings in purchasing basic irrigation equipment, quality seeds, and seedlings. Harold decided to plant tomatoes and bell peppers, crops that had good demand in the regional market. Walter opted for leafy vegetables like lettuce, arugula, and kale. Joseph chose medicinal plants and herbs. Mrs. Ruth preferred flowers for sale on holidays. Sebastian planted high-value commercial fruits like passion fruit and acerola. The results appeared quickly. Within a few weeks, the crops were green and vigorous, contrasting dramatically with the parched landscape around them. "Harold, your tomatoes look beautiful," commented Walter on a Saturday morning. "I've never seen such healthy plants in the region." "It's the water quality, Walter. Professor Charles Edwards said it has the ideal mineral composition for agriculture." The crops, irrigated with water from the artesian wells, attracted attention from the entire region. Other producers began visiting the properties to understand how it was possible to maintain green crops during the worst drought in recent years. "How did you manage to get all this water?" asked a producer from a neighboring town. "We discovered artesian wells that had been sealed for over 30 years, explained Harold. "And is it possible similar wells exist in other regions?" "Very likely. The government project in 1987 covered an area much larger than our region." The news about the success of irrigated agriculture spread quickly, attracting attention from agricultural technicians, researchers, and even investors, interested in replicating the experience. Dr. Martin Henderson, an agronomist from the University of West Texas, visited the properties to study the results of the pilot project. "Gentlemen, you have developed a sustainable agriculture model that can be replicated throughout the semi-arid Southwest," said Dr. Martin. "How so, Doctor?" asked Sebastian. "The productivity you are achieving with localized irrigation is 3 times higher than the regional average, and water consumption is 60% less than conventional irrigation systems." Dr. Martin proposed a partnership with the university to document and refine the techniques the group was developing. "We can turn you into a reference center for irrigated family farming. This would bring resources to expand the project and at the same time protect you from external pressures," explained the professor. The partnership with the university was enthusiastically accepted. Within a few months, the group's properties became an open-air laboratory for sustainable agriculture research. Agronomy students began internships in the region, specialized technicians offered free advisory services, and researchers from other universities came to study the model developed by the group. "Harold, who would have thought the holes in your backyard would become a subject of university research?" joked Dorothy, watching a group of students measuring the productivity of her father's tomato plants. "Daughter, I knew that land was hiding something special. My father wouldn't lie about that." The success of the pilot project brought recognition, but also intensified the pressure from Northern Agriculture LLC. Richard Patterson returned with a new strategy, offering technical and financial support to refine the group's project. "Gentlemen, our company was impressed with the results you achieved. We would like to offer our support to expand the project to the entire region," said Richard at a meeting in the mayor's office. "What kind of support?" asked the mayor, who had called the meeting to discuss regional development. "Investment in infrastructure, cutting-edge technology, specialized technical assistance, and most importantly, access to export markets for the region's agricultural products," explained Richard. The proposal seemed attractive, but the group had already learned to be wary of the company's offers. "And what would be the counterpart?" asked Dr. William, who was attending the meeting as the group's lawyer. "A partnership where our company would manage the marketing of products and the strategic use of water resources, ensuring sustainability and maximum profitability for all involved." "In other words, you want to control the water and the production," said Sebastian. "We want to professionalize the project so it can have a significant regional impact," replied Richard. The mayor became interested in the regional development proposal and began pressuring the group to accept the partnership with the company. "Folks, you have to think about the good of the whole town. A project of this scale could generate hundreds of jobs and attract other investments to the region," argued the mayor. "Mr. Mayor, our project is already generating positive results for the community. We don't need to give up our autonomy," replied Harold. "But you don't have the means to expand the project on the scale necessary to truly transform the region," insisted the mayor. "We have the support of the university and access to government financing programs for small producers. We can grow gradually and sustainably," said Joseph. The political pressure intensified in the following weeks. The mayor began creating difficulties for the group's activities, citing the need for new permits and authorizations. Mr. Harold, the city is requiring an environmental impact study for you to continue using the artesian wells, said the inspector during a visit. What environmental impact? We are using the water sustainably and producing food for the community, replied Harold. It's a new requirement from the Municipal Environmental Department. Dr. William advised the group to legally challenge the new requirements, as they lacked a solid legal basis. This is an attempt to create bureaucratic hurdles to force you to accept the partnership with the company, explained the lawyer. What can we do? We will file an injunction to ensure you can continue your activities while the regularization processes are underway. Meanwhile, the investigation by the District Attorney's Office into the cancellation of the 1987 project was progressing and beginning to reveal important information. Prosecutor Dr. Margaret Stevens had managed to access the archives of the old United States Bureau of Reclamation and Drought Control, USBR, and found documents proving irregularities in the project's cancellation. Gentlemen, we have discovered that the project was cancelled following a meeting between the then Secretary of Water Resources and representatives of private agribusiness companies, informed the prosecutor in a meeting with the group. Does this prove there was external influence on the decision? Asked Walter. It proves the decision was not purely technical or budgetary, as was claimed at the time. There were economic interests involved. And now? Now we will summon those responsible at the time to give testimony. Some are still alive and can clarify the real reasons for the cancellation. The official investigation further legitimized the group's struggle and attracted national media attention. Reports about the discovery of the artesian wells and the investigation into the cancelled project appeared in major newspapers and television programs. Retiree uncovers 30-year scheme to hide water in the Texas plains was the headline of a national newspaper. The national repercussion brought political support for the group. Congressmen and senators from Texas positioned themselves in favor of the sustainable family farming project and against the pressure from large corporations on small producers. Congresswoman Mary Wilson Davis, an expert in rural development, visited the region to see the project firsthand. Mr. Harold, your discovery represents much more than water. It represents the possibility for thousands of rural families to access resources that were being monopolized by large economic groups, said the Congresswoman. Congresswoman, we just want to use our water in peace and help our community, replied Harold. And that is exactly what we are going to guarantee. I will introduce a bill to protect small producers who discover water resources on their properties. The federal political support created a more favorable environment for the group, but it also increased the pressure from Northern Agriculture LLC to resolve the situation quickly. Richard Patterson sought out Harold for one last attempt at an agreement. Mr. Harold, this situation is getting out of control. Politicians, the press, the district attorney's investigation, this isn't good for anyone. It's good for the truth to come out, replied Harold. The truth is that you don't have the technical or financial capacity to properly exploit these resources. In the end, you'll just waste a unique development opportunity. Let us worry about that. Mr. Harold, I'll make a final proposal. Our company completely withdraws from the region, puts no more pressure on you, in exchange for a non-competition agreement. How so? You commit to not expanding the project beyond the current 5 properties, and we look for other regions for our investments. Harold realized that proposal meant the company acknowledged defeat, but was trying to limit the growth of the group's project. We do not accept limitations on our growth. If other producers want to join the project, we will welcome them, said Harold. Then we have nothing more to discuss, concluded Richard before leaving. After Northern Agriculture LLC's definitive departure from the region, the group could finally focus on the sustainable development of their project. With support from the university, funding through government programs and political recognition, they began expanding the model to other properties in the area. Everyone, we've received over 20 requests from families who want to join the project, Sebastian announced in a meeting. Do we have enough water for all of them? Asked Mrs. Ruth. According to the university study, the 17 wells in the region can support up to 200 families with sustainable irrigated agriculture. Then let's grow, said Joseph. The project's expansion brought organizational challenges. It became necessary to create a formal cooperative to manage water distribution, technical assistance, the collective purchase of supplies, and the marketing of products. Harold was chosen as president of the Cooperative of Family Farmers for Sustainable Irrigated Agriculture of Amarillo, CFSIAT. Mr. Harold, you who were called crazy 3 years ago are now a cooperative president, Walter joked during the founding assembly. Walter, I just dug holes. The rest was a consequence. It was 472 holes, Dad. Don't forget that number, added Dorothy, who had become the cooperative's secretary. The cooperative grew quickly. In 6 months, it already had 50-member families. Within a year, 100 families were producing irrigated food in a region that once suffered from drought. The cooperative's products gained fame in the region for their superior quality. Tomatoes, vegetables, fruits, and herbs produced with artesian water began to be sought after by restaurants and specialty markets in Houston and other major cities. Your tomatoes are the best I've ever tasted, said the chef of a famous Houston restaurant who visited the cooperative. It's the water, chef. Pure water from the region's aquifers, explained Harold. I want to buy all of your special tomato production. The commercial success allowed the cooperative to invest in technological improvements and expand production even further. 3 years after the discovery of the first wells, the region had been completely transformed. What was once an arid and economically depressed area was now a hub of sustainable family farming recognized nationally. Dad, you transformed not just our family, but the entire region, said Dorothy during a cooperative celebration party. Daughter, I only did what my father would have done in my place. He defended the family land. But by digging 472 holes, Dad, no one else would have had the courage to do that. When you truly believe in something, Dorothy, there's no number of holes that's too many. Harold looked around the party and saw entire families celebrating the prosperity they had achieved together. Children played among green crops that once seemed impossible. Young people who had left the region during the drought had returned to work at the cooperative. Dr. Richard Anderson Clark, the geologist who had revealed the truth about the hidden reports, approached Harold. Mr. Harold, I want to thank you for having the courage to make our discovery public. I carried the weight of that secret for over 20 years. Dr. Richard, you did the right thing when it was time to speak the truth. And you did the right thing when you didn't give up digging, even when everyone thought it was madness. Mrs. Grace, now 75 years old, was also at the party, proud to have contributed to the discovery that transformed the region. Mr. Harold, my husband would be happy to know that the wells he helped drill are finally serving the community, she said, with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Grace, without you and your husband's map, we would never have uncovered the whole truth. Sometimes people hold on to information waiting for the right moment to use it. The right moment came when you started digging. Professor Charles Edwards, the retired geologist who had done the first technical report for Harold, had become the cooperative's permanent consultant. Professor, do you still remember when you first came here and saw those 3 abandoned wells? Asked Harold. I remember perfectly. I had never seen such high-quality water resources being wasted for so long. And now? Now you've created a model of sustainable utilization that's being studied by universities across the United States. You can be proud of what you've built. Walter approached with his family to say goodbye. Harold, thank you for insisting on the story of the wells, even when I doubted it at first. Walter, you were the first neighbor to support me when I told you about the discovery. That was very important. And now we're partners in one of the most prosperous cooperatives in the region, said Walter, smiling. Partners and friends, Walter. Friends. Joseph, Mrs. Ruth, and Sebastian also came to say goodbye, each thanking him for the initiative that had changed their lives and those of their families. Mr. Harold, when you started digging those holes, I thought it was just a stubborn old man's thing, confessed Joseph. And it was, Joseph. A stubborn old man who wouldn't give up defending the family land. It's a good thing you're stubborn, said Mrs. Ruth. Otherwise we'd still be suffering from the drought while that company got rich with our water. Mrs. Ruth, you were stubborn too when you decided to support the project despite all the risks. Yes, Mr. Harold. Sometimes good stubbornness is necessary. Sebastian, who had become the cooperative's technical director, brought numbers about the project's growth. Mr. Harold, we now have 150 member families, we produce 300 tons of food per year, and we've generated 400 direct and indirect jobs in the region. Sebastian, when you talked about making the discovery public, I was scared. Now I see you were right. Transparency was always our best weapon against those who wanted to exploit us. The prosecutor, Dr. Margaret Stevens, was also present at the celebration, representing the district attorney's office that had investigated the entire scheme to conceal the water resources. Mr. Harold, thanks to your discovery and persistence, we managed to uncover a corruption scheme that lasted decades, said the prosecutor. Doctor, what happened to those responsible? Several former politicians and businessmen have been indicted. Some financial resources were recovered and are being used to fund family farming projects in the region. And Northern Agriculture LLC? It lost several environmental licenses and is being investigated for illegal practices. It will hardly be able to operate in the region again. Dr. William Turner, the lawyer who had defended the group from the beginning, brought news about official recognitions the project had received. Harold, you've been selected to receive the National Sustainable Family Farming Award, informed Dr. William. Dr. William, who would have thought digging holes would win an award, joked Harold. It wasn't just digging holes, Harold. It was having the vision, courage, and persistence to fight for what you believed in. Dorothy approached her father with the grandchildren, children who had grown up watching their grandfather dig holes and now played among the green crops. Grandpa, tell the story of the 472 holes again, asked his 8-year-old granddaughter. My little granddaughter, once upon a time there was a stubborn grandpa who didn't believe his land had no water, began Harold. And then he dug many, many holes, continued the child. That's right. And in the end he discovered that the family land held a very special treasure. The water, the children shouted in unison. Exactly. The water that transformed everything around us. As the celebration was coming to an end, Harold walked to the spot where he had dug the first hole 3 years earlier. Now there was a commemorative plaque there. First artesian well discovered by Harold Mitchell. Beginning of the region's transformation. 2021. He remembered the eviction notice he had received, the mysterious debt, the neighbors' laughter, the company's threats, all the difficulties he had faced. But mostly he remembered his father's words. This land is special, Harold. You'll discover it when your time comes. Dad, I discovered it, murmured Harold, looking up at the starry sky. I discovered that our land held enough water for the entire community. I discovered it was worth fighting for. I discovered that sometimes people call madness what they don't yet understand. Dorothy approached and put her hand on her father's shoulder. Dad, what are you thinking about? I'm thinking that I dug 472 holes, daughter. Some were to find water. Others were to prove I wasn't crazy. But the last hole, the one that really mattered, was to discover that the greatest wealth isn't the water we found, but the community we built around it. And now, Dad? What are the plans? Now, Dorothy, we take care of this water as if it were our most precious possession. Because it is. We use it to produce food, to provide jobs, to keep our community united. And, most importantly, we teach the next generations that sometimes you have to dig very deep to find what you're looking for. Even if people think it's crazy. Especially when they think it's crazy, daughter, because usually the best discoveries start with someone doing what no one else has the courage to do. Harold looked around the property once more. Where there was once parched land, he now saw green crops irrigated by the artesian well's water. Where there was once despair over the unpayable debt, there was now shared prosperity. Where there was once the risk of losing the family land, there was now the guarantee that future generations would have not just a place to live, but a prosperous community in which to grow. Dorothy, said Harold, smiling, sometimes you need to dig 472 holes to discover that what we were looking for was always right beneath our feet. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this emotional journey of your Harold. Do you believe persistence can really transform lives as it did in this story? Leave your sincere words in the comments about this discovery that changed an entire community. Would you have the same courage to dig 472 holes, even if you were called crazy? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us in this story. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one.